What is happening, guys? It is the start of 2024, which means new tools for PGA here over at Stokastic.com. And I'm here with Brian Berryman. We're going to break down everything that you guys need to know to make money at PGA DFS this year using the new tools that we have here at Stokastic for the PGA seasons. We're going to walk through the contest generator, the simulation tool, and how to use all this, and the best ways for you to make sure that you're profiting and making the best possible lineups that you can for PGA in 2024. And where this starts, Brian, is with the contest generator, which is what's on screen here. It's just like the most simple overview possible. What is the contest generator and what is its function?
Yeah, Greg. So the contest generator, what we're doing with that is trying to come up with a set of lineups that is going to be the most reflective of the contest pool that you may encounter when playing on your selected site. So for this example, why don't we use DraftKings? And what we'll do once we start to set up the settings here is there'll be different pool sizes that you can choose from, anywhere from 250 lineups all the way up to 10,000 lineups. What you want to do as a user is make sure that you're selecting the pool size that's most accurately going to represent the contest that you're playing in. So if you're going to be playing in a small single entry tournament that only has 300 entries in it, you'd probably want to select the 250 pool size. But if you're playing more of the large field, high entry pool GPPs, you'd want to maybe go with a 10,000 pool size selection there. So let's say that we're playing the $3.20 max on DraftKings this week. It's going to have 20,000 entries in it. So we'd want to go with the 10,000 pool size. And then the other option that we have here after we select the pool size is the contest archetype slider. What this is going to do is really change how the pools are being created based on the level of competition that you're going to be playing for that pool. On the left side, you have low stakes. On the right side, you have high stakes. In the middle, we have the marquee setting. The marquee setting is going to be reflective of the big high dollar tournament for that week. So this week there's a $20 tournament. I think the prize pool is $200K to first. That would be reflective of that ownership set. But if you were playing like we said, maybe the $3.20 max this week, you'd probably maybe bump it down. The level of competition in that event is not going to be potentially as high as it would be in a $100 or $200 single entry tournament. So once you have these customized settings built out, we want to hit the generate lineups button, and that will create the pool that we'll want to use to start matching up some of these different lineups against and see what we could do in terms of the best ROI lineups.
Yeah, and that's what we're doing right now. I just press generate lineup. So it is now building us 10,000 lineups using the marquee settings. And then also, Brian, I want to ask you, because we've got two different package options. There's the base option as well as the max option. What is the difference in pool size that the base users can create compared to what the max users are allowed?
Yeah, so it's a great question. With our data plus Sims package, you'll be able to create a pool size of 250 or 500 lineups. This is a really good package potentially for people who are playing some of the smaller pool sizes on a consistent basis throughout the week, maybe even some single entry contests as well. A limitation with the data plus Sims package is you're only able to export 20 lineups from the simulation, which is different from our Sims Max package, which allows you up to 10,000 lineups created and also simulated. And there is no cap on the amount of lineups that you can export.
Yeah, and as you guys can see how quickly it runs, it took us here like, I don't know, 45 seconds or something like that to build out 10,000 lineups here in the contest generator. And now I've got some data on screen here, Brian, from the lineups we've created. There's the ownership, the pool exposure, the difference. So for starters here, what is this ownership column? What is this showing us?
Yeah, so the ownership column is going to be what our projected ownership is for every golfer in the field. And what we're trying to do when creating the pool based on the settings that you selected is create a pool that's going to be most reflective of the settings, not necessarily the ownership. So our projected ownership is typically based around the marquee setting anyway. So for this example, as you can see, the pool exposure and the ownership are going to be very close. If you were to adjust the archetype slider at the top, the differences would reflect based on your selection there. But because we kept it in the marquee setting, we're going to get very close to our projected ownership numbers.
Yeah, and then you guys will see that here right now. So we've got the ownership, like Brian said, that is the projected ownership from the Stokastic ownership algorithm. And the pool exposure, that's the amount of exposure we got to these golfers in our lineups. And then the difference, that's just simple addition and subtraction, the difference between the pool exposures and the ownerships. Now, what I think a lot of people think when they look at this, Brian, is why did we build lineups that are similar to the projected ownership? Like, why is it that we want these to match up in the contest generator?
Yeah, so the whole point of the simulation is to try and put the lineups into your simulation that are going to be as close to reflective as the actual lineups that you're going to see when the cards are flipped over after lock. And so by getting the player exposures as close to what we think the actual ownership of these players will be, the natural combinations of these players will match up with a lot of the lineups that you'll actually see when the golfers are revealed after lock, right? And so trying to get those as close to possible to the ownership projections is very, very important to the quality of your simulation.
And then you also have the ability to boost ownership here. So if you guys see that you could do 3 up arrows, you could also do 3 down arrows. But what are they actually doing here, Brian? So if somebody decides that they want to boost the ownership of somebody, what is the fallout? Like, what is that actually doing if they're increasing the ownership of somebody?
Yeah, so this isn't I don't want people to be looking at this as like, I want more of this player, so I'm going to boost their ownership. That's actually going to have an inverse effect on that player. So what you want to look at this is in terms of the ownership is if you disagree with our ownership projection, or you think, hey, like for this example, I really think Brian Harmon's going to be closer to 30 or 35% in this contest that I'm playing. You'd want to boost his projection to get him close to what you think his ownership is going to be. Again, the whole goal of this tool is to create a pool that is reflective of what you think the contest is going to look like, not necessarily what we think the contest is going to look like, what you think the contest is going to look like. So this provides you with that granular level of customization that is really important to this tool.
Yeah, and then one other thing to note as well is just because you press the up boost ownership, it doesn't actually change your lineups right here. What you'd have to do after is actually click regenerate lineups, and then it would create a new pool of lineups based on any boost that you make here to the ownerships of individual players. And then after you're done with that, you've created this set of lineups that you feel comfortable simulating. Then we would go over and actually simulate those lineups. So let's do that now, Brian. We're going to simulate the lineups that are built out here by pressing the simulate lineups button. And you'll see that already everything that we built on the other screen, it automatically comes with us onto the other page when we go to the Sims page. So before we actually do run the simulation, though, let's walk people through some of the other options that they could have here on screen before they click the run contest simulation, starting with the percentage to first payout. What is the setting that people should select here and why?
Yeah, so this is very important when it comes to the ROI of your lineups. You want to make sure that this percent to first column is reflective of the payout structure of the contest that you plan on entering. So if I'm playing a 100K guaranteed prize pool in the first place prize is $10,000, I would want to select the 10% to first payout structure there because it's really going to impact the ROIs of these lineups. If it's a top heavy payout structure versus a flat payout structure, it's going to completely change the ROIs of these lineups. So we want to make sure that we're paying attention to that drop down and not just constantly clicking 25% because that is going to have an impact there. Same with like the pool size and the contest generator. Some of these you may not have an exact, right? You might be playing a 100K prize pool that gets 15K to first. You'll have to decide if you want to go with the 10% or the 20% option there. Maybe run both and see which one you like better. But try and get as close as you possibly can to the contest you're playing in.
Yeah, so it typically defaults here to 25%, and different contests are different. Here's the easy way to find out what the percentage to first payout is in the contest you're playing, whether it's DraftKings or FanDuel. Click on the contest, look at what it pays out to first place, and look at the total prize pool. So if something is a $100,000 prize pool and 10,000 at first, well, it's 10%. If something is, a 300 or $400,000 prize pool and 100,000 first, well, that's 25% to first. And that's how we're choosing what percentage to first to select here. But now, Brian, people could also customize some of the projections here. And this is something that there's a pretty big update for all of our sports with in terms of the ways you could upload custom projections. The default is always going to be the Stokastic projections, but if you guys want to upload your own, you could do that as well. But how do they do that within the Sims tool, Brian?
Yeah, so there's a couple different ways that you can manipulate the projections. Let's start with the uploading of the custom projections. So you want to click on that link there on the right, and this will pop open our modal here that allows you to download the projections template. By clicking that button there, you'll be able to download the template that allows you to manually input all of your player projections right into there very seamlessly. If you know how to use Excel, a simple VLOOKUP function will be able to match the player name to your custom projections and easily translate that that projection number over. Once you do that, you want to make sure that you're saving that CSV and then just re-uploading it back right here into this modal, either by dragging and dropping or by clicking the upload CSV and selecting the appropriate file. Very simple process, and it's very quick once you get the hang of it.
Yep. And if you're going to be uploading a file of your own, you just want to make sure it has these three columns: player name, that's the one with the players' names; the projection, that's with the projection; and the ownership, that's with the projected ownership. And then you could upload it here, and it's going to immediately take in all of your own projections that'll show up right here on screen. But also, if people just want to use our projections and make some simple manual adjustments, they could do it using the green and the red buttons right here, Brian. And what do these do? And we're actually changing some of the projections within this page.
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly what you would think, right? So hitting the plus button is going to increase the player's projection by a point. The minus button will decrease the player's projection by a point. You can also manually type in a specific number. So say you want Ludwig Aberg to be 109 points. It's a simple 109, and then that projection will save. And these projections will then save from run to run now. So if you are running multiple different simulations, you don't have to constantly be re-uploading your custom projections. These are now being saved to your session here so that it's very seamless and quick to run multiple simulations if you choose to do so.
Yeah, and then you could always very simply, let's say that for Aberg here, you put in 109, and then you go, nah, I want to use the stochastic projection. Easy. You just click the rewind arrow here, and it goes back to our base projection. And then you've got what you need on the screen here as far as projection for Aberg. So let's go ahead. After we have all this data inputted, we actually simulate the lineups, which is as simple as run contest simulation. So now all of the lineups that were built in the contest generator page are being simulated here. But what does it actually mean when it's being simulated, Brian?
Yeah, this is the part that's really awesome about this tool. Right now, what we're doing is, well, there's a lot of different things that we're doing. On the player level, we are simulating on a hole by hole basis every single player in the field, making a cut if they don't make the cut, ranking the golfers at the end of the tournament based on where they finish for their finishing placement points. And we're doing that process thousands and thousands of times on the individual player level. And after each individual player level simulation, we get individual player level actual fantasy points that we are then able to apply to the lineups you built in step one in contest generator. So this very, very closely mimics what an actual DFS slate would look like from a golf standpoint. And so these lineups are then competing against each other in a very lifelike DFS simulation. So after every simulation run, each lineup will get ranked against the other lineups in your pool, assign the appropriate payout based on the structure that you selected in the percent to first dropdown, and then assigned what we call a simulated ROI percentage. The simulated ROI percentage is essentially going to rank the lineups based from best to worst based on the pool that you generated in step one. So this is a very, very advanced product. This is something that has been long leveraged by professional DFS players and something now that you can use right at the tip of your fingertips and put together custom simulations in a matter of minutes.
Yeah, and as you guys could see right there, Brian had, I don't know, like 90 seconds he was talking for there. And over
Yeah.
the course of that time, we had 40,000 times all the lineups we built. So we built 10,000 lineups and then simulated them 40,000 times. And in the time it took us to generate the lineups, that was like a minute. And then it was another like minute and a half to simulate those lineups 40,000 times and have them playing against each other. And you had mentioned there, Brian, that it's going to default to have all these lineups sorted by simulated ROI. But why simulated ROI? Why are we sorting all these lineups by the simulated ROI as opposed to something like just the fantasy point projection?
Yeah, that's the all-encompassing metric that's really going to tell you how that lineup performed in relation to the other lineups within that contest generated pool. So this is really going to be, like I mentioned earlier, ranking the lineups from most profitable to least profitable over the course of the 40,000 simulations. We also have other metrics here as well, like win percentage, top 10 percentage, cash percentage, if you choose to or to sort by those columns as well. But we highly recommend that you use the simulated ROI column in order to evaluate your lineups.
Yeah, and there's all other metrics in here, which it's going to contribute to that projected simulated ROI. So stuff like the win percentage of the lineups, how often do they actually win the contest? Top 10 percentage, how often did these lineups end up coming in the top 10%? Cash percentage, how often do they just make it in the money? Like even if it's a min cash, these are all things that contribute to that lineup's projected simulated ROI, as well as dupes. So dupes aren't going to come into play all that frequently, Brian, for PGA main slates where, we've got 90 or so golfers in the field. However, sometimes for showdown, they come into play. And that is something that we also have within the sim tool and the contest generators. You could also build out lineups for PGA showdown contests. But for some of the also small field events that don't have cuts, we'll see there only be like 25, 30 golfers. There is a lot of overlap. And how does the amount of times a lineup is duped, how is that factored into the Sims?
Yeah, it's absolutely critical. Like you mentioned, in large field events, normal full PGA golf events, you're not going to run into dupes all that often. But when you have a field of 30 golfers only, you're going to have duplicated lineups that appear quite frequently. And every time a lineup is duplicated, it's really eating into the expected value of that lineup. And the reason being is if everything goes right for that particular lineup and it happens to be the best lineup on that slate, if it is duplicated even once, you're winning way less money than you would be if you had a solo lineup that was not duplicated. And that expected value of that lineup with every duplication, it gets eaten into more and more and more. And that's going to be reflected in the simulated ROI. We do account for duplicated lineups. If the lineup is duplicated, we assign the payout of that lineup just like DraftKings or FanDuel would with a duplication. So it's very important that you're monitoring the dupes of your lineups because uh, those can be things that really eat into the overall quality of the lineup.
Yeah, for sure. And now here's where it also gets really easy to select your lineup. So let's say you guys are playing 20 lineups. You could favorite the top 20. If you're playing 150, you favorite the top 150 or a custom amount. Like let's say you're playing, 25 lineups for a slate. You just click in 25 here, type it in, and then your top 25 are going to be selected with hearts here. And then you could also check other metrics, which we're going to go over in a second. For the purpose of this, I'm going to favorite 150 lineups, and then we'll look at some of the other data that's within the Sims that can help us really optimize the lineup decisions that we end up making here. So, Brian, we've got our top 150 lineups now selected. So now here we have the player ROI tab. What is this showing us? We've got here average simulated ROI, projected fantasy points, and fantasy points is pretty straightforward. That's just our fantasy point projection. But what is the average simulated ROI for each golfer in this column?
Yeah. So what this is doing is taking the ROI of all the lineups that a particular player appears in and is providing you with the average ROI of that lineup. It really gives you a sense of what players are contributing to high ROI lineups and which players are contributing to low ROI lineups. Now, I wouldn't say this is the be all end all metric that you should be looking at to select a player pool or anything like that, but it does give you a good sense of who are the sharper plays on the slate, who are the ones that are providing the most value and most benefit to their individual lineups. So it's a really interesting metric to look at, definitely.
And then if we look at the next tab, this is favorites. This is simply the top 150 lineups that we favorited before. And now we have the exposures column, which is my favorite thing to look at, Brian, because this lets me know who it is I'm rooting for on any given slate. Who is it that I'm overweight to? Who is it that I'm underweight to? And that's what the exposure column is going to be showing us, which is this is the amount of exposure that we have to these golfers in the top 150 lineups that we have selected, the fantasy point projection, the pool ownership, which gets back to what we were talking about in the contest generator, as well as the leverage column, which is the difference between the pool exposure and the exposure that we ultimately have. But now we've got this data here on screen. So people are looking at this and they know, like, okay, Matt Fitzpatrick, he's in 36.7% of my top 150 lineups. If somebody wanted to have their own input on this and they wanted to change some of the exposures of players, what is the best way for them to do that within the Sims tool?
Yeah, so I think you laid it out really well. Let's say I'm looking at the Matt Fitzpatrick exposure, and let's say I really like him this week. And right now, I don't even really have. I have just over 2x leverage. Maybe I want to get to 3 or 4x leverage. What you want to do is click on the ROI boost tab right there. That's going to bring up a modal that allows you to manually boost a particular player, and any lineup that player appears in, that lineup will get a boost in their ROI to help it rank higher on your list of lineups. So I would recommend let's boost it by 20% or 25% and see how that may impact some of our exposure to Matt Fitzpatrick when we redo our quick favorites.
Yeah, and really easily for each time you click the red button here, it's going to go down 5% because if you want less exposure to somebody, you can do the inverse too, and you can make it go into the negatives. And then for every time you press the green button here, it's going to go +5. So if we go to 25% on Matt Fitzpatrick and then go boost ROI, it's not going to make an immediate change because first we have to do is go back to the lineups tab, then you unfavorite the top lineups that you had before. So now nothing is selected. And you already see here on the left, Brian, the lineups that have Matt Fitzpatrick, they have the 25% ROI boost. So like you said, all the lineups that have Matt Fitzpatrick getting sorted a little bit more towards the top. And then we select the top 150 lineups. We could go back to the exposures and you'll see that Fitzpatrick, who before was 36.7% owned in our lineups, has now gone all the way up to 76%. So that's what we're doing right there with the boost tab, where we're making it so that if there's a golfer that you guys want more of that the Sims aren't giving you, and it could be for whatever reason, maybe you think that you just think that golfer is going to be really good, or you think that he should have more exposure in your lineups, whatever it may be, that's the easiest way to manually adjust your lineups. And then once again, same thing. If there's a golfer you don't like, you go into the negative and change them as well. And then something else you could do also is like you could go and change the player's fantasy point projection, which will kind of have a similar sort of impact where if somebody's projected for 106 fantasy points and you're on the custom projections page, you put it in for 102, that's also going to manually change their exposure. But now if somebody made a bunch of changes, they don't want to save them, Brian, if they just want to go back to the default, what's the easiest way for them to do it?
Yeah, so you can just click open the ROI boost again, and there's a clear boost button right there that'll take you back to your original projections in terms of your ROI. I do want to touch on one thing there with the ROI boost. So it does take into account if you're boosting multiple players. Say you boost Fitzpatrick and then Aberg, and then you negatively and positively boost a bunch of other players. The lineups where those players appearing together, it's going to add the boosts together. So you could be multiple boosting if Aberg and Fitzpatrick were in the same lineup, or negatively boosting if you have negative players as well. So something to keep in mind when you're boosting players, it is going to have a pretty big impact. So just make sure that you're being cognizant of how much you're boosting every player.
Sure. And then after you're done with all that, this is where it's really easy. You just click the export favorites button, and then it's going to export those lineups. And then you could upload them directly to DraftKings, to FanDuel, whatever it is that you're playing. And then also, if you've already got lineups reserved, you could simply open that CSV within DraftKings or FanDuel and you copy and paste the lineups that you just built in here over those ones. You save the file, you upload it back to DraftKings and FanDuel, and then your lineups are good to go. It is really as simple as that. But then also, Brian, there are ways for people after the slate is over that they could evaluate their lineups within our Sims tool. What's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, this is probably the most overlooked feature and one of the most valuable features that we do have, and it's the post-contest simulator. Something I want to stress that has been a big impact in my game, and I know others across the site as well, who have really used this data to take their game to the next level. So what the post-contest simulator is doing is very much the same process that we did on the front end in terms of taking the lineups and simulating them and getting a simulated ROI. But instead of theoretical lineups that we think the field is going to look like, these are the actual lineups that we've exported from DraftKings. And so what we're able to do is take the lineups and take your lineups and simulate them 40,000 times against all the lineups that you actually played against in the contest, and really get an understanding for how well you played from a strategic standpoint for that slate. It's very, very easy as a DFS player to get caught up in the single real life run out, the single sample size that you're getting, and make conclusions based off of that. But in reality, if you were to play that exact same golf tournament over and over again with the exact same players at the exact same course, you're going to get different results. It's just the nature and the variance of what we're doing as DFS players. So this tool allows you to take a very zoomed out view of your strategy and see if what you're doing is actually profitable over a large sample size. And it's extremely valuable information. And Greg, I don't know if you want to run through some of the data points we have here, but it is a fantastic tool.
Yeah, and we've got this on screen here. I just pulled up random contest from last week. This was the 600K season tee off for PGA here on DraftKings last week, and ran the pre-contest sim. So pulled up all the data here. And what you're going to see in here is the simulated lineup ROI. You're going to see the actual lineup ROI, which is going to be what the lineup actually produced. So the one with the highest simulated ROI, that's the one that ultimately ended up winning here. And then the simulated ROI, this is what we were projecting the lineups to have an ROI of. And you guys can look at all the individual lineups as well as the individual golfers' ROIs. Is there anything else you like to look at when you're within the post-contest sim, Brian?
Yeah, I'm always checking in terms of how the best players played. So, in how you can easily identify that for the most part across your contest is to filter the total lineups by the maximum amount of entries for that contest. And really, you can compare, okay, these are the best players that are in the DFS space. They're contributing the most money. They have a process that they believe in. How did they perform? What did they do differently than what I did? And how can I start to reverse engineer how they came up with this high ROI? How did they come up with their strategy and evaluate? Maybe I was too chalky on some of my lineups. Maybe my actual or my simulated average fantasy points number was too low. Maybe I need to have more projection in my lineups. There's a nice balance and a lot of data that you can really gain from looking at this. And I would highly recommend every single slate that you play, you're analyzing your play against the best players in the world and trying to improve in that way. And this tool is fantastic for doing that.
And that's the process from start to finish, from building the lineups to simulating them to evaluating them after the fact. Everything that you need to win a PGA DFS this year, it's all included here at stokastic.com. If you guys want to sign up, there's a link for that below. Stop guessing, start winning, join Stokastic. Let's have a great 2024 together.